All right, I got Dr. Drobot on the show today. He is a health performance specialist for high performers interested in longevity and the founder of the BioMed Center in Scottsdale, Arizona. Dr. Drobot, welcome to the show, brother.
Thank you. Thank you.
Excited to talk to you, man. I know you've got a massive background in holistic health and also just all the fun things that we were talking about offline of, biohacking and red light and cryo. And I think you and I both agree, like, man, all these things are really good. Rectal ozone. Sure, let's do it, but the idea is like how much and when, and is there a system and protocol? We're not just jumping on a red light bed just because. Like, is there a method to the madness? And it sounds like from all the people you work with, the people that come into your center that have autoimmune, chronic health conditions, or professional athletes that are looking for the edge, your 20 years of experience, you've really dialed in those systems and protocols to make the tech like usable, right?
I mean, it ended up, instead of just practicing with tech, I mean, it's a medical practice. People always get upset when I say this, but man, I've practiced on a lot of people. When we're putting all these new things in place, and again, we've probably had these new things for longer than most people. So you stack these therapies, and it never really mattered what the therapy was because we always were looking for the response to the therapy. Like, that was the important part. People forgot that. I'm going to do a bunch of stuff and then I'm going to get this response. But we're like, well, what was the response? Like, if you couldn't measure it, then how did you know that something was happening? And they're like, well, I just feel better. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure. Sure. And so we practiced on a lot of things. We implemented a lot of things, a lot of these different therapies, and we based it on, original biology and physiology. And that's how we kind of come up with, like, this is the thing, or this is the hole in the bucket, or then let's add this new therapy. So it is, the biohacking thing is interesting, as you and I were talking about, because it's a bunch of people practicing on themselves, right, for one form or another. And I think that that's better to take the proactive approach than not. But I think we're still stuck in that space of, like, what are you doing, right? Because in this world, social media is great. And I'm like, man, I see some different things, or somebody comes in and their day is regimented with therapies. Like, I wake up in the morning, I do my cold plunge. Then I hit my red light bed. Then I do my 25 minutes of diaphragmatic breathing. Then I'm going to take my psychedelic. Then I'm going to go ahead and eat my keto. Then I'm going to test my blood pressures. And then I'm going to go ahead and do my breath rates. And I'm like, okay, we can't. We can't do that. And with a background in exercise physiology, it's like, if you went to the gym and you just did a couple reps on every single machine in that gym, everybody knows, nothing would happen, right? It's too many inputs for your nervous system to figure out, what did this guy and gal really want me to do with this? If you go and you try to learn 15 languages at the same time, you're probably just going to have a noisy system that's not going to really pick up anything. So I applaud it because, again, before it was cool, it was crazy. I was the crazy guy, right? You come to my place, It looks like a spaceship. What's this guy doing? And now it's like, yeah, this guy he's just a biohacker. And I'm like, this is a different level of expertise, but I'm just so happy that finally that stuff has exposure, right? We're talking about it.
Yeah.
Which is an improvement over 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm with you, man. We were just saying, I can't stand. One of the big problems I have with biohacking is that everyone's an expert now. Yeah, you have candida. Just Joel, take some oregano oil and charcoal. It's like, okay, but for how long and when do I stop? And they don't even know. I mean, you've got I remember this was years ago, Dr. Drobot. I remember this thing went viral. People, and maybe I have no idea if it works, but people were taking, it was like rubbing alcohol. I forget what it's called. It's a specific type. I think it starts with a T. And they were taking this for candida, and it was a complete hack. It's a biohack. And I'd have to go back and look for it. But again, I know the dose makes the poison. But the point being is just like, okay, but to your point, great, I have an ozone machine. Great, I have a hyperbaric. Big deal. Do I get in every day? What's the purpose around it? And what I love talking about with you is that you really understand that. And like you said, if someone comes to you and they're like, oh, well, I just want to hack my health. No, like why? Like what are we working on? What's the purpose? And let's get you there using some of this tech and using some lifestyle design choices to get you better.
Well, that was like your body was supposed to go through some seasons, right? Like in the wintertime, your immune system elevates. In the springtime, your hormone system elevates. So if you just irritated all day for 365 days, not sure what you're doing, right? It just doesn't operate like that. That's like people know that, like they say, "Well, I'm that much better," and I'm like, "Do you have a dog?" They're like, "Yeah." And I said, "Just imagine with your dog. Would you ever do that to your dog? Fill him up with 30 supplements, right? Just keep irritating them every single day. Like, don't ever let them sleep. Like, you got a schedule. Like, you're dragging them. Like, they're like, no, I wouldn't do that. And I'm like, well, you're a mammal, right? Like, you are a mammal too. Like, it's not what you do, it's what you recover and respond to. So, like, there's got to be a rest cycle. You know, the hardest thing now, and we saw it in fitness, is like we really, and especially in pro athletes, like we ran out of an off season. Like nobody takes an off season anymore. And it's because they're looking at their phone and they're seeing, oh, Jim's crushing a workout right now. Like we're in July, like we're supposed to be resting and recovering, but if Jim's crushing a workout, and we saw that with like CrossFit and everything, which is like, wow, everybody's just volume and intensity. And it ended up being like, health is not how much you can do and doing the most out of it. Like we know when we look at blue zones, like these cats are just sitting around, right? They're just smoking, drinking, laughing, like they're doing a little bit of work, but they're with their family. Like they're having a good time. They're not regimented in doing all this stuff. So when people come to the clinic and we do like in-depth central nervous system and heart rate variability, I don't see like a lot of nervous systems that are elastic enough to respond, which is like half of the problem. There's just too much noise, too much load. And then the other systems can't get out of the way because they're just that crushed. And so it's like less is sometimes more seasonality and finding like, here's what I'm going to learn. Like, here's a subject I'm going to figure out for 3 months and then rest it. So, and I see people like they have stuff at home, which is dangerous because the office hours never stop. And you're like, look, I'm just going to get in my hyperbaric every single day. And I'm like, that's an oxidative treatment. Like you can't do that every day. Like cells don't like that every single day. So we're getting there, right? Everybody's getting there. And I have faith.
I love it. I love it. Okay, talk to me about this. Someone comes into your clinic, and there's people right now that are listening. They have no idea, maybe even what we're talking about, or like, okay, if I go to the BioMed Center in Scottsdale, I want to come work with you, or just peek in and like get a treatment. But what is the game? What is the buffet of stuff that you have there? And then also, I'm curious, is my next question is then how do you like to diagnose somebody? So, in the sense of like, what are the steps that they might go through? You just mentioned HRV and like a nervous system. Yeah. Is that like something typical you'll do for everybody? And that's kind of what I'm wondering is like, what are the processes that you like or frameworks you like to use to kind of help see where people are at and where they need to go so they have that roadmap?
Right. Like we have an assessment process that we go through with full body thermographies and again, brain scanning, heart rate variabilities, biological impedance analysis to look at phase angles and cellular health. And you got to look like I'm still into biology and physiology. Like I'm still into like forget pathology and like let's actually look and see what's under the hood. Like bring me your hormones, bring me all of it. I want to see all of it. And then we'll go ahead and once we get that assessment, we'll find out like what system is the weakest. And then we go ahead and into the treatment part of it. So if you come in with autoimmune disease, I mean, look, your immune system is reactive. But why is it reactive? Like sometimes it's from the nervous system. Sometimes you don't have enough cortisol. Sometimes your digestive tract has an infection. And maybe it's a little bit of everything, but like there's no protocol. Like you usually show up and it's like the accountant goes through your books and figures out where the leak is. And that's still like a good process. And again, I always bring up veterinary medicine because they actually still do it well because their patients don't talk. And they're like, they put your animal there and they like go through everything, right? They don't just be like, mercury, it's got to be mercury, right? And then we're just going to go and it's like, Like, worry about the pathology after it. Start with physiology and biology and actually do an assessment process, right? And then once you do the assessment process, you're going to figure out, like that accountant, he says, like, stop going out for so many dinners. And you're like, all right, like, I got this, right? I was like, I know how to deal this because I have a plan, and I figured out through my assessment process, like, what I'm not supposed to do. So are you either subtracting something or adding something? Add a therapy or subtract it. And like you said, the lifestyle stuff comes in the middle. Then you figure out how you're going to build a better biological system.
I love that. That's awesome. So using some of this thermography and phasology, you're able to kind of detect at the root cause where people are starting, which is so key because to your point, like I'm just thinking, you know, one of the worst autoimmune conditions that you see people suffer with is like Lyme disease, right? Now I hear all kinds of things with Lyme, right? It could be a mycotoxin, you know, co-infection, right? We hear all kinds of things. But you're just guessing. You're just wondering, like, I don't know, is it parasites? There's a camp of people that say, oh, it's always parasites. You got another camp saying it's glyphosate, right? And maybe it's a combination of both. But in your practice, then you actually can figure that out. Has anybody come to you too, where like they were convinced, or even Lyme? I don't know. Do you have Lyme patients and they're just like, I don't know where to go, I don't know where to start, and you've gotten them better using this assessment process and dialing them in?
Correct. Like if it was all those things, and we say like my thing is always work on the biggest system, and then I'm sure, like, listen, nobody's done more testing than I have, right? And everybody's gonna have heavy metals, and everybody's gonna have like some kind of dysbiosis. Like, we already know this. So if we looked and said, well, if you've got all that, like, let's go work on the lymphatic system and use ozonation or blood filtering. And let's go ahead and clean that space out so that once we get the space cleaned out, like white blood cells and immune stimulation goes up, and then your body does like a pretty good job of like dealing with some of the pathogens. Like, I'm not going to be able to attack all that. And then when you see that like on thermographies and it makes sense to people. And then you're like, all right, like I'm not now worrying about one thing. I'm worrying about the big thing that is like being affected by a bunch of these little things. And once we make that big piece of physiology better, like the lymphatic system that we were using, then everything gets better. And then it's like, okay. Now, unfortunately, you need a lot of treatments in order to be able to do that. Like, you need to have a lot of different tools in the toolbox so you can say, like, I'm going to put that body under a systemic therapy, and then I'm going to see that how that reacts. And then when it reacts, I'm going to go ahead and put it under another systemic therapy so I can keep charging the machine up so it can go through the process of elimination or detoxification. And that's, you kind of have to have all that in order to get like something successful. You have to have the surgery, and you have to have the physical therapy after the surgery, right? You got to be able to do all these things so that at the end of it, the net is you improve that organ system. And then we get great results because we have that methodology, and like we've practiced trying to do it the wrong way. It doesn't work. So that's how I end up doing it, is like whatever you come with. Yeah, we all have environmental chemicals. We all like, what do you want me to say about that? There's just as many people that test positive for Lyme disease that have no symptoms as people that test that have symptoms. And if you're just going to pick one thing, then you're going to see a lot of it, right? If you're going to just go ahead and test a lot of things, then you're going to see like, wow, that's too many things. And then I better focus on just that person and make that person stronger. And then we'll get through a lot of those little things.
Yeah. On that note, you know, just thinking about chronic disease and autoimmune, what do you think then is a surprising factor that a lot of doctors overlook?
Nervous systems. You know, they just don't, everybody will take autoimmune disease, and for whatever, I don't understand how they treat it, but everybody treats from the neck down, right? It's an autoimmune disease process. They just don't pay attention to the central nervous system. But we all know that in medicine, conventional medicine, we'll say stress exacerbates any autoimmune condition, right? True story. But we never look at the nervous system and try to put it into a better spot. And the nervous system is just based on balance and electricity, right? If we charge up that system and we're just like, well, the only way we know how to do that was sleep. It's like, okay, there's a lot of other ways to do it. But we know if we make that nervous system better, it goes into remission, right? Like, I don't know. People are like, I don't know how that happened. If I don't get stressed, then my system is a lot less reactive. And we're like, shit. but we never focus on the nervous system. So the
Never. You're so right.
autoimmune, like, I don't know, the autoimmune chronic fatigue thing to me is like still an interesting, like, why aren't you guys trying to make that better? Why are you just putting a load on it with this detoxification? Like you said, just jam, 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 right? IV antibiotic, jam, jam, and a bunch of detox. And we'll do, like we were laughing about chelation. Like, we'll just go ahead and load that lymphatic system up with as much stuff. And then hopefully the person gets through that. Or if they don't, we're like, yeah, that was great. You had a Herxheimer, right? You Herx, so you just had a die-off reaction. Like, you're getting it. And you're like, man, if I do squats and the next day, like my back, I can't get out of bed, like that was good, right? And I guess it's hard because we pick and choose. Like, if you're feeling sicker, you got to get sicker to be better. And you're like why? Like, why can't I just like get better and then you can go ahead and do some of the other treatments? Like, why can't you just make me better? So when we're looking at nervous systems and there's nothing there, right? Or the nervous system is so tight and you can just tell they're in a chronic sympathetic state. Like, why would you do more to that person? Like, then you got to do treatments to build that nervous system up. And then miraculously, their immune system calms down and you can do treatments. So, yeah, it's chronic disease. It's when you look at organ systems, like they follow patterns. And when you make the organ system better, a lot of things get better. And then as a physician, like if you don't hang your...
And that's not even requiring you to do detoxification. You're just supporting those organs is what you're saying. And then, wow, guess what? The body has the right input. It knows how to heal. It didn't need you to pump it full of metal chelation and do all these special biohacks. It just needed the right input to actually be able to heal, right? Kind of sounds like what you're saying.
Well, if you put it in a position, right? Like if I put a cast on my broken arm, that's it. That was a treatment, right? I put a cast on my broken arm and then magically I take it off after 6 weeks. It was in the right position. My arm isn't broken anymore. By all accounts, it's a miracle, right? And we just like, we don't look at any other organ system like that to say, like, if you take the load off of it and then you step back, you don't need to take that cast off that arm every day and mess with it, right? You're not supposed to. Like, if you put any organ system in the right, like, position, if you take a nervous system and, like, you say, hey, like, just do this or don't do that, and you leave it for 30 days, like, it gets to a new position. And then miraculously, like, again, it's pretty decent. It bothers me because in medicine, like, to get stuff done now, we have to do a bunch of other stuff, right? Like, we're just taking a bunch of stuff and doing a bunch of stuff. And then you're like, that person, like, they're not going to respond well to that. Because if you would have done the initial assessment, you would have said, can't do it, right? Just can't tolerate it. So it's a different way of thinking. You need a lot of assessments and tools to do it, but it is the best way to do it because, you know, you're doing a bunch of systemic therapies, and then you pull the cast off the person. You're like, pretty good, right? Not bad.
Yeah. Talking about nervous system, what's your favorite nervous system practice or tech that you like to use that you just see, man, it gets the best results?
Well, we do TMS, but like I still like central nervous system for whatever reason. You know, maybe it's because I see a lot of athletes are kids with concussions and a lot of cognitive decline. And so you understand, like, when the central nervous system is the lights start going out, the rest of the body, you know, just kind of shuts down. And so we do, you know, it's called brain frequency. We do a unique form of full brain TMS. And then we combine that with a bunch of, you know,
Dr. Drobot, sorry to cut you off. TMS, when you say TMS, you're talking about transcranial therapy, or like what is TMS?
Yeah, like transmagnetic stimulation, which is usually only done in one spot. But when you use like low levels of it and you're going ahead and you're like treating the whole brain, which is hard to treat, like you need to get through a thick skull. So when you're powering up that nervous system and you're, you know, making things in that tissue in that brain respond better, kind of like an exercise program, and you get that central nervous system, which is that central computer, to have more juice and better response, then I think like that's my favorite at the moment. Because we do hyperbarics, we do all that stuff, but unless you have electricity and you have connection in that brain and you're kind of firing that thing back up, like it's hard from here on down for it to be able to like give any appropriate response. So that, like, I like whole brain centered stuff. People We need great equipment to do it, unfortunately, and it's not something you can do at home, but it's still like one of my favorite things because we see miraculous changes, right? Like people get their lives back from concussions or cognitive decline or long-standing illness or long COVID or whatever we ended up happening that affected that blood-brain barrier and shut that computer down. Like it's vitally important that that thing fires back up so that you can get a lot of the processes that it's running repaired.
Yeah, I love that. And you know, it just reminded me, I had a guy on, a doctor, Gupta, and he has a program that he helps people with. And like you said, I'm talking about long COVID and things like mold and Lyme and all these autoimmune diseases. And he doesn't do anything. He said, these people have gone and they've done all these other treatments, detoxes, none of it worked. And he said, you know why? He said the same thing that you're telling me. Their nervous system was hijacked. And so they could not even be in a state, and we know that the body has to be in a parasympathetic state to heal. And so if it's not even in that state, nothing happens. So he gets them in that state. And then guess what? Then they go back, go do one of those protocols that we're talking about, and they get better. So it actually sticks, whereas normally it won't. So I love what you're saying. That makes complete sense.
Yeah, if you don't respond, you can have the greatest therapy in the world, but if you can't respond to it, it's crappy therapy, right? Like you got to get the body. So like you got to, and it always sounds cheesy when we're like, treat the body. Like, no. Like put the body in a position to respond to a therapy and then add the therapy and then you'll get the response. Like you just have to have enough stuff and you got to be able to figure out like, why isn't the body responding? But I mean, I always just say this, you know, if you gave me 100 people and I didn't even know, and we put them like through central nervous system stimulation and lymphatic drainage and basically electrical and photonic work, like 90 end up pretty good, right? It's like 5% require a little bit more, but 95% when you bolster physiology like that, like you get a good response. And so you learn like it's less important to go ahead and worry about pathology and more important just to go and charge the system back up. And then you can like you roll it off the manufacturing line. You're like, that's a pretty good machine now, right? That looks good. So it just translates well because it can go from the youngest to the oldest, right? It doesn't matter. My pro athletes, like they all get the same treatments. People are like, well, what do you do for pro athletes? The same thing that I do for that person with Lyme disease, right? I just make those systems better and we put more gas in the tank and then they get the response that they want. Like you're not doing anything supposedly or that much different. You might do it in a different weight or a different order, but at the end of the day, like you go from pathology to physiology to performance, right? That's pretty much what we're trying to do. We're trying to go from bad to normal to good. And you've got a liver, I've got a liver, that Lyme disease person has a liver, that pro athlete, like, hey, when you make those organ systems better, like the output is better. So we get the desired response.
I love that. You've mentioned lymphatics several times. I think that's overlooked in a lot of treatments, including me. I always forget about lymphatics, and it's not really talked about, really, when the health circles. What do we hear the most? Circulation, the cardiovascular system, right? Or the microbiome. But we rarely talk about the lymphatic system, and it's so critical. Talk to me about that. I know you've mentioned it several times and why it's so imperative in your treatment protocols. And what are some of the things that you like to do to kind of stimulate that lymphatic system?
Yeah. So again, when we're looking at big systems, right, we already said the central nervous system, I'll start there, right? You got to click that box. And then the next in my order of importance, so it goes nervous system and then it goes lymphatic system, right? We're looking at like start with the biggest systems first. Right, you start with these big systems and that lymphatic system can stretch from here to the moon and back. Like people start with I'm Canadian, so you only have like 5 liters of blood, right? That's not a big space, not a big compartment. So I'll leave that thing to last, right? Like I don't care about that. When I'm looking at the lymphatic system, you're saying you're 80% or 75% water. And I have the advantage of doing those full body thermographies. So I see like it's jacked, right? Especially in chronic inflammatory diseases or fatigue. Like, of course, it's the oil filter isn't working. So we need to get that oil filter working because that is the vehicle that lives between the blood and the cell. So if that environment like can't be good as far as a transport mechanism, then I'm not going to get supplements there and I'm not going to get waste products away. So then we have to do visceral manipulation, ozone carbonic acid saunas, pressotherapy. Like we've got to do all these to make an oil change. You know, one of the little departments in my clinic is called Foxy Detox, because I mean, detox, everybody expects it to be terrible, right? They're like, you know, so it's like, look, it can be cool, right? It's just like an oil change. You drive the car in, right? You're going to get pressotherapy. Then you're going to go into ozone carbonic acid saunas, and you're going to end up with colonics. Like, that's it. You change that oil a couple times, you get that lymphatic system filtering, and you'll see, like, now we can do that detoxification. Now oxygen can get to the cell. Like, there's just a big thing, and it's a huge space. And if we don't worry about changing the oil in that space, then it really doesn't matter what you're going to do, because you're not going to get things to the cell. You're not, like I said, going to get things away from the cell. So it goes central nervous system, lymphatics. Everything else comes after I get those two systems decent, because I need those at least functioning to do any other treatment in order to get the responses that I need to get.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So it sounds like, and I know some of the tech, some people might know, but the Flow Presso, which is like a full body lymphatic drainage suit that you can compresses you and moves the lymphatics. And then it sounds like they jump into some kind of like HOCAT. I think it's a HOCAT, right?
Exactly.
Kind of sauna.
Yeah, we'll get it into a HOCAT, and then we'll finish off with colonics. So it's like mobilization. You got to mobilize. That's what we're going to do with the Presso, or full body lymphatics, right? Then they're going to have to do, we got to open up those lymph vessels with HOCAT, which will essentially, it's ozone saunas and carbonic acid and microcurrent and light. So we're going to bring those to the surface. And then once you get those things circulated, you know, we usually will do a colonic therapy so that we get the organs of elimination to start to be fired up. And so I look at it as an oil change. And again, I just have the advantage of having those full body thermographies, so I can see, like, this person's all jacked up, right? If you're walking on the planet, chances are you've never done anything for your lymphatic system. So like Europeans figured it out, right? They just fasted and did all these things. So again, they could just eat a bunch of sausages
and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, they rest it. You know, again, it's that seasonal approach. Like, they rest it. They do their little oil change so they can put a bunch of stuff in there. But you really need to focus on that lymphatic system. People say detoxification, but you and I know what that means. Just take some charcoal, like, just eat this, just jam a bunch of laxatives in there. Like, it's still, and that's not about getting stuff out. It's still about, like, pack a bunch of this stuff in, blow the toilet up, and then you look, you got a Herx, right? Look how good you did it. And you're like, you know, when I used to travel to other places in the world, they still thought we were crazy, right? They were like, why? Like, that's why you go to Europe, and it's a little different these days, but all of those supplements were prescribed, right? They were behind a pharmacist's counter. Like, you couldn't go to a Whole Foods and, like, I'm going to buy 50 milligrams of DHEA and I'm just going to gobble it up because I saw an Instagram post that said this stuff is legit. And they're just still like, Asia controls it. Like, Amazon's disrupted that, obviously. But like, in their mind, if you're taking something still, like, you're upsetting biochemistry. So like, we're going to let the experts decide what you're going to take, like a pharmaceutical. So you can take like 100 milligrams of vitamin C, but the hell, you're taking 5 grams of that stuff because, you know, you're not qualified. So you get to see the importance of polypharmacy in other parts of the world where they're like, I care about the result, right? So you watch what you put in there.
Yeah. Okay. So we start off with the nervous system, makes complete sense. Then we move to the lymphatic, the drainage system, the detoxification. We optimize that. What's next?
I always like to see hormones. You know, for me, it's like, if you have an autoimmune disease, like, I don't mess around. It's like putting the arm in a cast for a little bit. You're not supposed to be on 6 hormones at the same time, but we have to make sure the endocrine system is at least functioning. Because again, massive system, right? Massive system, controlling a lot of different things. So then we'll move down the ladder, and I'll make sure that the cellular system, so there's got to be like some input of electricity and photons. That's where red light and like EWatt and microcurrent comes in. Like, we got to add these 3 so we can get some kind of like an exchange, and we're going to form some ATP. And then let's go to the system that's affected, right? Then everybody's like, oh, digestive tracts are that important. Yeah, that's just one tube, man, through the central part of your body. It's really important. but it cannot function like in the absence of having waste removal, having, like you said, parasympathetic input, and having like hormone to rebuild the muscle. It's a big muscle. It's a tennis court. So I'll go with those orders first, and then I'll start going to digestive tracts. And then I don't really care about joints, but like joints are like the smallest system. So we just have this. I always start with those big guys, and then we get to like, what is your pathology? Well, I have like rashes. Okay, well, like let's get this other stuff, and we may never have to worry about the skin, right? But
That's
the
my
immune
guess. By
system,
the time you get to the detoxification, you probably heal the rashes. You probably don't even have to get,
probably, yeah.
you
There's
know.
very few times I need to do a local therapy, right? Most times we'll do a systemic therapy, and then the local stuff just kind of dissipates. And if it's there, it's much easier to treat than like just focusing on the local problem. And again, I'll say Lyme disease because we just talked about it. Like to do IV antibiotic and just keep hammering at it without doing the other stuff is a reason why we just get relapse after relapse, right? Like we know that,
Yeah.
we know it's a poor choice. Might be, it's done a lot of good, but it's hard to hold the system, hard to get it to respond for a long period of time without it having an issue. Chronic fatigue the same way, fibromyalgia, all those ones where we know it's multi-system problem. We need to make the system, we need to go ahead and stimulate so we get better cells doing better things, and times that by a couple months and we'll get a much tougher system.
And just by doing things like red light, EWAT, I don't know, maybe HBOT, depending when you're talking about bringing charge back into the cells, when you're doing some of these therapies, do you see, I don't know, that's what I'm asking you, does it stick? Does bringing the charge up in the cell, do you actually see, like, is that enough to get it to turn on? And now the mitochondria is working good again. We've got it robust. It's firing. And now the body can go do what it needs to do. Or is it one of those things where it's like, no, you'd have to be doing red light for the next 20 years, Joel.
No.
Your cells suck. I don't know. That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, like when you clean up, again, the lymphatic system, so you have that space. Like if you look at electrons, photons, and oxygen, so we'll just call those supplements, right? We could put them in a supplement jar and everybody would take them. That's like if you put exercise in a pill, everybody would take that, right? It's hard to do, but if everybody could take it, they'd take it because the responses are so great. So if we looked at electrons, photons, and oxygen, like they still need the framework in order to be successful. So, to your point, if you're building mitochondria, you probably like using hypoxic treatments or using hyperbarics, like you're planting seeds that will go for months after that. So hyperbaric's a little different. Hypoxic training is one of my favorite, oxygen contrast therapy, because you're recycling old mitochondria out and you're planting a stimulus to make mitochondria that can do something better with the oxygen and photons that you're adding. So it's still like the cells that you're doing stuff on, especially if you're sick, may not be the best quality, right? They have changed to do just enough, but they've been inhibited by something, and they're giving you something but not giving you all of it. So in order to go ahead and recycle or plant new seeds, like that's where a lot of those big therapies come in. And then when you're doing oxygen, electrons, and photons, like you're going to go and set the table up to build new cells in the months to come. So I always look at those and say, whatever you think you're doing to it, to your point, it's like a battery. You could charge the battery every day, right? But we've all had crappy iPhones or crappy computers that they're just old and they don't hold a charge. Like you can go ahead and you just charge them all the time and you get a certain amount out of it, but it's better to go get the new battery that holds the charge. But there's still value to that. Like people are like, so I shouldn't do my stuff every day. It's like, look, you're doing something, right? You're adding something in. Like I shouldn't do my red light or shouldn't do my EWAT. It's like, yeah, you should, but you want to do it in blocks of time, and you want to make sure like when you're adding those supplements, you are building a better cell, which usually means you got to recycle some of the old crap in order to add stuff and make something better. So I never think it's bad practices. I think it's just oversimplified to the point where if I just, again, do everything, something's got to stick. It's like, why don't you just do that for 45 days and then take the stimulus away and you'll see like, yeah, overall your energy levels will be better because you've stimulated new things. You know, there's like very few things in the world of cells that you do it and immediately you feel like you get an immediate response to it, besides like sleep, right?
Yeah.
I get a good sleep, the next day is
That
pretty
and
good.
coffee. That and
Yeah,
coffee.
that and coffee. Like if you get some stimulus, like if you get some real good chemicals, you step away from it, you're like, man, that bottle of wine was legit, right? Like I thought I had problems. I drink a bottle of wine, it's gone. But in physiology, you've got to build biology. You can't hack it. Like we were laughing. I'm going to hack phys. Like somehow you figured out a simplified way. And it's like, it doesn't work like that. Like if I cut myself, I'm not Superman. In the morning, it's going to be gone, right? No matter what I did to it. Like there's still a process. You can expedite the process, but you're not going to hack the process, right? You still need to add good things and build biology. I always said, don't hack biology, build it. And when you build it, like it has the ability to do a bunch of better things.
Yeah. Yeah. So good. Any, just from our conversation, or were there any just transformations or, I know you worked with thousands of clients, but just does anybody stand out where like this person came to you on your deathbed? They're like, you're my last hope. I don't know anything that's going to change for me, but I heard you're pretty good. I thought I'd come check your stuff out. Did anything like that where like in 3 months, they're like, that person's out the door walking and they thought their life was over? Have you had any of those kind of people come in?
I mean, like that is how I built my business, is all from fly-ins that would come in for 5 days. So I was in Canada for the first 13 years and I still had fly-ins, even though it was cold as ass up there. So then, you're doing something right? Like when you got an undesirable place, but people are that desperate that they got to find an answer. And my whole practice was all referral. So you would get like a lot of, there was a time when you'd get like a lot of chronic fatigue, and I'll throw Lyme disease and all that into the chronic fatigue stuff or autoimmune puzzle, right? I'll throw it into that bucket. And so when people come and like they're significantly debilitated, and then they walk out like months later and like they're functioning, right? And then 3 more months and like we're resolving. It was probably 10, maybe it's longer. They made it's called Lighting the Path. There was a documentary they made about my clinic. And it had to be 10 years ago, and it was focused on autoimmune disease. And you get to see some of these transformations. And I think it's on Gaia Network now, Lighting the Path. And so you see some of it. And to me now, it's less impressive, right? Because that's my expectation, right? My expectation is you take a person and they have an injury, and then 3 months later, they don't have an injury. That injury might be called chronic fatigue. That injury might be called cognitive decline. Like in my mind, like something has happened to physiology, so we'll call that an injury. And then the goal is to do whatever rehabilitation needed. And then the person like doesn't have the injury in 3 months. And so that's like that's how we buttered our bread with people coming in with these multi-system problems of autoimmune disease, and they just couldn't get back to a normal day. And so like, I don't get to see like a sore throat anymore. Like you wouldn't just come in and be like, I don't get to see that. So it's always like the garbage can. Like people are like, nothing's working. Go see this guy in Arizona.
You're either getting the best athlete or you're getting the worst people.
Yeah. He's got all this crap. I don't know what it is, but like there's another couple people that like we're treated by him and they're doing great. So like nobody knows when you come in how to explain what we do, because there's really no explanation for it, right? Like you're doing biology and physiology with a bunch of tools, and you're just making those systems better. And globally, like physiology repairs and people's conditions like repair. And so it's like, it's always interesting because in a day, like I cannot tell you what I'm going to see, right? I'm going to get somebody that fly in that like has had chronic disease for 10 years. The next person that comes in wants to live to be 160 years old, right? The next person is 22 and has infertility. So like I don't have a specialty. We just get to see it. And then a bunch of pro athletes. So it's always interesting because like you're going to see a bunch of stuff and you realize like, it's the same container. The body's a big container. So you just keep treating that container and things get better. So that's rewarding. You get to see like people bash medicine right? People hate medicine, especially after COVID. Like they're just like, we got a bunch of people and they just hate medicine. But it's like medicine, like it's my job, right? Like it's still like it's cool. Like if you get in a rollover accident, like you're gonna love medicine. Like you're gonna see emergency medicine like rip you up. But like medicine's in a weird spot, and after like that whole COVID thing, like people lost a lot of trust in a lot of things. But more importantly, they started to do like a lot of research. They started to take control of their own health, and then now it's like self-care over healthcare, and you're like, whoa, like let's get back to like some kind of meaningful thing. So I think like the next 5 years will be interesting in health and medicine to see like, are these two camps of health and medicine going to come back and be friends, or are they going to go further apart and like really make a divide, which would be, you know, unfortunate, because a lot of my patients, like you said, you hear these, they're like, look, my doctor has nothing for me, right? And I'm trying to like do my research, and my doctor doesn't want to hear any of my research, and they don't know anything about like red light, and they don't know anything about these things.
That's the big beef with medicine, the Western approach, I'll say. And I mean, I can even think my brother, this was like 10 years ago, he had chronic fatigue syndrome for a host of reasons. Now, looking back, I understand why.
Right.
Well, you know what his doctor told him in the 10 minutes that he has to speak with him because of insurance reasons? He said, you have depression. You're depressed. Here's the medication. And my brother walked out of that thing. He's like, I don't feel depressed. I got a problem, but it ain't depression. He called me. He goes, Joel, what do I do? And we started a whole bunch of holistic stuff for him. But I think, again, that's the problem with medicine. The Western, I'm talking about Western medicine specifically. I know what you mean, though. I always say I'll never go to a Western doctor in my life if I want to get better. Now, if I get in a rollover accident, I'm no dummy. Like, please put me back together, Western medicine. Like, I know it has a time and place. So I agree.
Yeah. It's always hard because I have a whole bunch of doctors as patients, right, in Western medicine. So like I have them as patients. So they'll tell you the same thing, and I feel for them. Right? Like if I got to see somebody every 15, like if I see somebody every 20 minutes or 30 minutes, like I can't pay my light bill. Right? Like I just can't do that. So like why would I go and spend $1,500 to learn about red light therapy or hormones or anything? I can't use it. Like, and it's like, I get it, but it's very frustrating because your patients come in armed, right, with a bunch of Google stuff, and they're like, you're trying to give me that antidepressant, and I've already read the side effects, and the person's like, what do you want me to do? Right? The doctor's like, I don't have a lot of time, right? I only have a few tools. So it's a bad exchange. It's just I'm
gonna say to you, I honestly don't care. Be better then. Be better. Because I think the standards are weak in Western medicine. I would much rather come see a guy like you. I'll pay more money out of pocket to see you. I don't care. I want results and I want to get better. I'm not going to the Rockefeller model of medicine, which to me is a complete sham. I don't want to go down this route with you, but I will go. My whole point is be better. And there was a ton of corruption. We saw it in the last 3 years. To me, the Western model has been this way for years. And they just poured gasoline. I mean, I was censored as a holistic health guy. I know most people don't know because they don't post things on social media, but I do. And I was censored. I mean, it was criminal what they did. So my point is
medicine really got emotional. Like you saw like, man, like they really like it got them like, and then when I started 20 years ago, like a doctor and lawyer were like noble professions. And now everybody hates doctors and lawyers. Like it really evokes emotion in people because unfortunately everybody's got a story, right? Like everybody's like, my dad went through this and they treated him like this and it was garbage and they ended up killing it. Like if you've got a problem and you go to like, again, unfortunately standard medicine, like we don't give you a great outcome. And then when you've got a bunch of people like trying to accelerate, we'll say the industry, like you can see with you, right? Like it's emotional now. Like people like they're pissed.
Yeah. I mean, luckily, listen, I knew about this before the pandemic. I wasn't ever seeing a Western doctor. And again, why would I never see a Western doc? Because he doesn't get people better. Yeah. I mean, they don't. They patch people up and they put them on a pharmaceutical subscription plan for 30 years. And they guarantee, hey, guess what? You actually won't get better. I'm not going to get you better. You'll probably get sicker with type 2 diabetes. And they're still claiming that, and I'm just going to use that as an example, that type 2 diabetes, it can't be fixed. That is a complete shams. Anyways, I have no respect for the typical Western doc because, and again, it just, they don't get results. So I could care less. To me, it's not as emotional. I'm getting passionate right now, but that's just because they're a joke. They don't get results. You're saying like, oh, I wish we could be compassionate. I'm not compassionate. Be a better service. And again, it's not their fault, the doctor. I think they go into the profession with admirable intentions. It's the system that I have a problem with. So anyways, I don't want to go down this route anymore. I want to talk more about you. Talk to me about, just briefly, I know we have like about 10 minutes left. Talk to me about sports performance and what maybe are just some of the little known techniques or treatments that you've seen really significantly enhance an athlete's performance that most of us would never even think about.
Well, I still like again, EBO2 treatments and ozone treatments, the oxygenation, because, in pro athlete, well, we'll say in Olympic, amateur and pro athletics, like we're really governed by, water. So it's like, look, we can't do performance enhancement from a biochemistry aspect, but we sure can from a physics aspect. So EBO2 or blood filtering and oxygenation, ozonation, like really getting those lactates out and then adding good stuff in besides hormones, like, because again, we're governed by that.
EBO2,
so,
is that like a 10 pass kind of like ozone
like
therapy or
like an upscale 10 pass? So we do ozone and then we do 10 pass and then we do something called EBO2, which is a higher oxygenation, ozonation, going through photobiomodulation as the blood goes through this chamber, and then going through a dialysis filter to filter out inflammatory proteins. So it is like the oil change for the blood, similar, like I said, the Foxy detox or the Hockett Presso colonic is like that detox for the lymphatic system. So you get the blood system now filtered and looking good, and you get the lymphatic system looking good. Well, you can drive that car pretty good. And everybody, like over every time, like we're all going to accumulate things. Like they're just going to run out of space to put stuff. So when we can do blood filtering and some of the higher oxygenation therapies for athletes, I mean, that is great, right? Because then reload the system, put a little bit of electrons back in there, release them into the wild, and they run fast, right? It's just like, it's a clean system. We know that from any other sport, right? We take auto racing, pull them into the pits, clean everything up, drive it back out. It's a matter of time before it fills up again. But I mean, it is doing that and stimulating new oxygenation so that we can really, again, recycle and put new stuff in there. Game changer.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty cool. That sounds really, really high tech.
It's invasive, right? It always takes, like, people are like, well, how do you get the results? It's like, you got to have good equipment and great staff. Like, that's how you get a good response, because some of that stuff's pretty invasive, right? You got a catheter in each arm, like it's filtering through dialysis. Like my auntie, like if you would have had a day, like dropped me 25 years ago into my practice now, and I sat back and looked at it, I'd be like, what the hell is going on here? Right.
You would have never dreamed that this is what you'd be doing, right? Yeah.
No, because I was always one that came from the exercise physiology. So you were always into like increasing performance. And to your point, we had that talk with medicine, and medicine is boring, right? Medicine is like, you get this, and like I could still be a primary care physician, and it's like, wow, there's nothing that really was exciting to it. And then I started like going to other places, and you're like, man, that's crazy, but it works. And then you get to this graduate level of doing these big things and knowing like you're going to get big results by doing big things, and you have to have great staff to do it. And then you get really great results. So it really it really has evolved over 20 years to be like something that if you started in this field, that would not be your appetite, right? It would not be what you'd want to do.
You wouldn't be starting there, that's for sure. It's been a gradual step up,
I'd sure like to see somebody start there, because it was exciting for me over 20 years. Like, I'd like to see what that 60 days looked like, because you'd be like, oh, I did not buy into this. So like, it looks different because it is different, but to me, it looks normal, which is always like funny.
Hey, real quick, but just for like people maybe even at home or maybe not at home, what are like what's some of the great tech that you like to use on a daily basis that you're like, man, I know this moves the needle, and so I am going to do 3 minutes of red light, maybe some EWAT. I'm just curious, like, what are your kind of favorite tech that you think that really moves the needle? I would do that daily or every other day at least.
I think, like, again, EWAT to me, like hypoxic training to build mitochondria is like a labor of love, but it is like exercise on steroids. Like if you had 20 minutes to do stuff, like that still to me is adding oxygen and making new mitochondria and getting rid of old ones. Audiovisual entrainment, which is using, again, assessing that nervous system and retraining that nervous system. I still like those. Like I have them at my house, right? So if I'm going to do something, whether it's going to be like, I'll have oxygen therapies because I know that, again, every cell wants that. If we look at just mitochondria and we say, how will we build better? Like we know we just add oxygen in some way, and then calming a nervous system down because I run hot, right? Like I got 50 million things to do, and I need 50 million things to do. Like I drive my wife crazy on vacations because it takes me a while. And people are like, well, you have ADD, and I'm like, it's untreated and I like it, right? So like I need to make sure that I go ahead and keep putting quarters in this machine, but I know that it needs a window of time. And I took my mom put me in meditation classes when I was 8 years old, and then even the meditation teacher was like, it's not the spot for this guy, right? This guy, like, so audiovisual entrainment by using brain tech, wonderful. Oxygen, adding it, wonderful. Like you got those two, you can do a lot with that. Red light, I think. Red light, I think is cool. Like I have big beds, I think it's good, but it's not going to move the needle like those other things are.
Love that, man. Thanks for sharing that. I want to wrap things up, but before I do, just any exciting projects or things that you're working on right now that you're excited about, you could tell us about.
Jeez, I really cognitive decline. That's probably like tech for cognitive decline, or doing a bunch of like two areas. Cognitive decline pisses me off because, again, when medicine, like we do nothing with it, and like it's a 15-year degenerative process. So post concussions, like post Lyme, post COVID, like anything that affects central nervous systems, I'm really getting into tech to reverse that. So that's a passion project of mine for no other reason than I think it's interesting. And then the other one is obviously longevity medicine, using, we do V cells, exosomes, stem cells, and then combine the tech together for people that are, high performers. That's always going to be one of my expertise because, again, I live in that world and I don't want to stop or slow down. So, all of those regenerative, longevity, systemic treatments, between that and cognitive decline, like that's my passion over the next 5 years.
You do stem cells as well at the BioMed clinic?
We do. I love stem cells. I love cell therapies. I love any kind of cell therapies because, again, young cells do young things. So to my point before, like sometimes you need to like replant, like you need to go ahead and fix some soil, plant some things up because I'm 50, right? If I get sick at 50, like wouldn't hurt if I had some young cells doing some young anti-inflammatory things. So in my business, again, we have to go ahead and we've got to add some things to move the needle. So yeah, like it's nothing that I don't love that's going to be regenerative. It's just, I've got to make sure you prepare the environment so you get the best response.
No, yeah, I just didn't. That's a lot. I mean, people, their whole clinic is stem cells. I didn't know you do that as well. I mean, what don't you do? On that note of cells and regeneration, I just thought about this. What about NAD? What are your thoughts on NAD or NMN? Do you think that's a viable supplement?
I still love it. We do obviously IVs and injections. Orally is still like, when you're testing it and you're looking at it, like, again, loading doses of NAD are wonderful things, but it's still mitochondrial medicine. So, I mean, if you have crappy mitochondria, like, why would you add a bunch of NAD to it? Like, it's just going to be a catalyst. So I still like it with oxygen and electrons. So I'm still like, anytime that you want to do any longevity stuff, like you just add these things because they're like ingredients to make a better soup. But in the end, like the soup ends up being the product, which is mitochondria. So like you still need to focus on a bunch of the different inputs to get the best thing out. But like my pro athletes, every week, 750 milligrams of IV NAD. anybody that plays contact sports, or a lot of them that play contact sports, because again, central nervous systems, they don't like being contacted. So I've got a whole bunch of them that religiously do that, even though it's a miserable IV. They do it because it really like improves the ability of the central nervous system to repair itself.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that. Dr. Drobot, man, last but not least, if someone wants to connect with you, learn more about you, or, you know, where can they connect with you? Is it your website, social media? Where's the best way to kind of connect and see what all the good things you're up to? And then if they want to schedule an appointment, they can do that as well.
Yeah, usually people will just contact me. So they'll go to the biomedcenter.com. And again, there's way too much stuff. Like, we have 2 clinics. So we do a bunch of biological dentistry, and they're like the whole body stuff. Usually you'll just go ahead and call my Arizona clinic, or just people, the number of questions I'll get on Instagram is always funny, because that's now the preferred method. Like, I'm accessible. Like, you can find me. And again, I like to ping pong back questions. And so, yeah, I'm accessible. You call my clinic in Scottsdale, you'll find me, or you get me on one of the social media platforms, you'll get me. Like, people are relentless. They're crafty. So you'll find me. And I still am with that guilt. Like, if you ask me a question, like, I got to get your response to you, right? I still come from that era where, like, you have to answer messages. Like, people, they can't, the ghosting stuff never works for me, because I'm like, oh, man, that was important to that person. I better get back to them. So they'll find me.
Amazing. Dr. Drobot, thanks for being on the show, brother. I appreciate you.
Absolutely.